Do any stories this week. I had wanted to do a story last night, as I usually do on Motzei Shabbos. It didn't work out. But tonight, I happened to meet two young yeshiva students on the way to do a mission, Ishlichus, in Melbourne, Australia. And before they left, they said, please tell us one story. Tell us a story of the Rebbe. And their Uber was outside already. But they said, no, we have to hear a story from the Rebbe first. And they inspired me because, as the previous Rebbe writes, when you hear a story of a tzaddik, it connects you to the tzaddik. The previous Rebbe spoke about how various things connect us to tzaddikim in different ways. A teaching of a tzaddik connects us to the thought of a tzaddik, and a story of a tzaddik connects us to the maaseh, to the action of a tzaddik. So I wanted to share a few stories about the concept of connecting to a tzaddik. When the Rebbe Rashab was very young, he and his brother, Rabbi Zalman Aaron, would go together to visit their grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Tzemach Tzedek would always give them a few coins. But the last time the Rebbe Rashab went to see the Tzemach Tzedek, the Tzemach Tzedek gave him a half a ruble, much more. And he said to him, I'm giving you a half a shekel, half a coin. In Hebrew, the word half, machatzis, is made up of 5 letters. And Tzemach Tzedek said the center letter is tzaddik. The 2 letters closest to the tzaddik mean chai, alive. And the 2 letters farthest from the tzaddik, mem sof, stand for the opposite of life, highlighting that connecting to a tzaddik gives us life. As it says in the Torah, you who cleave to Hashem are alive. And the Gemara says, can you possibly cleave to Hashem? The Gemara answers, whoever connects himself to a Talmud Chacham, to a Torah scholar, it's as if they connected themselves to Hashem himself. So in this endeavor of trying to connect yourself to a tzaddik, there is various streams of tzaddikim, various dynasties of tzaddikim, and the question is, how do we look at various streams of tzaddikim when you can only have a real allegiance to one tzaddik? As a chassid to a rebbe is a very unique and a faithful relationship. How are we meant to understand the various streams of tzaddikim? Today was the yahrzeit of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and one of the most famous stories of the Orach Chaim is that he was once traveling together with a group of people in the desert, and Shabbos came, and he didn't want to travel anymore, although according to Jewish law, his life was in danger, but on his level, he wasn't meant to reckon with the laws of nature at all. As the Ramban writes, that there are various levels in our relationship to Hashem, and on a simple level, looking at nature, looking for means within nature to receive Hashem's blessings is something we're commanded to do. But for tzaddikim in the caliber, let's say, of Yosef HaTzaddik, of Joseph, when Joseph asked the butler to intercede on his behalf to the Pharaoh, that was considered a sin for Joseph, because on his level, he wasn't meant to consider at all and to reckon at all with the realm of nature. In a similar way, the Orach Chaim was completely above nature, and Orach Chaim, he wanted to leave the caravan and stay in the desert for Shabbos. And he did so. He stayed in the desert, and miraculously, this lion came before him, and the lion crouched in front of him and eventually brought him to safety. The lion, as the Rebbe once said the story, and he said that it says in the Torah how the animals will fear you. And it says in Tanya, when will the animals fear you? When the image of Hashem is upon you. In Genesis, Hashem promises Adam the animals will fear you, and because of the tzelem Elokim, because of the image of Hashem. So for tzaddikim, where the image of Hashem is upon them, there is this unique, awesome, miraculous behavior of animals that the lion was afraid of the Orach Chaim, and instead of attacking him, he crouched before him and led him to safety. Miracles which are beyond our understanding. So the Orach Chaim, famously, it is said about the Orach Chaim that had he met the Baal Shem Tov, Mashiach would have come. And yet, he wasn't meant to have met the Baal Shem Tov. He had his own way of serving Hashem, and meeting the Baal Shem Tov wasn't something that he was meant to do. Similar thing happened also with the first Rebbe of Chabad. The Alter Rebbe had one teacher whose name was, I think it was Sachar Dov, I think of Lubavitch, Skabla. And this Rabbi Skabla didn't, although he was a chassid of the Baal Shem Tov, he never mentioned to the Alter Rebbe as a child his connection to the Baal Shem Tov, who the Baal Shem Tov was at all. And the Alter Rebbe never knew about the Baal Shem Tov. It's a story in itself, but it's just very, very briefly. The Baal Shem Tov told the Alter Rebbe's parents that he should not, they should not bring him to the Baal Shem Tov except for his haircut. And the Baal Shem Tov did when a child turns 3 years old, then it's customary to cut off their haircuts and leave their side locks, their payas. So Baal Shem Tov gave the Alter Rebbe his very first haircut, and the parents of the Alter Rebbe told the Alter Rebbe, this was your grandfather. And the Alter Rebbe actually considered the Baal Shem Tov to be his spiritual grandfather. Hold on a second. So this was because the Alter Rebbe was a student of the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So he was his spiritual grandfather. He learned from someone who learned from the Baal Shem Tov. So the Alter Rebbe was at first upset at his teacher for not sharing with him who the Baal Shem Tov was. That was his only encounter with the Baal Shem Tov. He had no idea who the Baal Shem Tov was, although that experience meant something to him. His whole way home, he asked his parents, who was this Zayda? Who was his grandfather? But he didn't know about the Baal Shem Tov, and it bothered him. And he was wondering why his teacher would hold that back from him. Until the Alter Rebbe learned the deepest meaning of the names of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei Elokim. There are different names of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei Elokim. And the Alter Rebbe learned that Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name of Hashem, which means revelation, and Elokim is the name of Hashem, which means concealment, which causes concealment. Hashem has the power to reveal himself and the power to hide himself. And although on the surface revelation seems to be a lot better than concealment, but there's something that concealment accomplishes as well. And that is, I'm oversimplifying, I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but just for the purposes of this conversation, when there is concealment, that allows there to be a service of Hashem that comes from within. When there is revelation, so then you're overwhelmed by the revelation, and the service of Hashem isn't as deep. So you're able to connect more to Hashem's essence when there isn't revelation. So although the Baal Shem Tov brought to the world Gili Shemavai, revelation of godliness, the Alter Rebbe wasn't meant to experience that in order for the Alter Rebbe to be who he was meant to be. In a similar way, the Orach Chaim wasn't meant to meet the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov and the Orach Chaim weren't meant to meet. Yes, something amazing would have happened had they met, and as tradition is, Mashiach would have come, but the Mashiach that would have come wouldn't be the Mashiach that we're really looking for. In other words, there would be something missing in the coming of Mashiach had the Orach Chaim met the Baal Shem Tov. There was something that would be missing. The Orach Chaim had to be him, and the Baal Shem Tov had to be him, and they weren't meant to meet. There's something that, although the Baal Shem Tov brought to the world this great revelation, but it wasn't meant to be given to the Orach Chaim. When the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, he was succeeded by his son, the Rebbe Marash, and when his son, the Rebbe Marash, passed away, there was a question of who was supposed to be the next Rebbe. And although people knew the younger son of the Rebbe Marash was meant to be the successor for many reasons, but the Rebbe Rashab resisted taking over officially the leadership of Chabad until his older brother passed away. But they asked his older brother, Reb Zalman Aron, what do you think about your brother, your younger brother, being the Rebbe? So Reb Zalman Aron said something very remarkable. He said, a Rebbe is something which doesn't have different ends of the perspective. It's not part of a spectrum. It's either you are or you aren't. Either you're a Rebbe or you're a charlatan. In other words, it's not possible to be a Rebbe and be halfway a Rebbe. Either you're fully a Rebbe or you're not a Rebbe at all, or you're just pretending to be a Rebbe. So that's what the Razah, the Rebbe Shah's brother, said. Something unique about this position that doesn't allow not just for mediocrity or even for partial success. A Rebbe means someone who is fully a Rebbe. That's what Reb Zalman Aron said. On the other hand, there was a tzaddik who passed away and who was succeeded by his son, who wasn't as great as his father. And as the Talmud says, if the original recipients of the Torah were like angels, then we're merely like people. If our grandfathers were like angels, we're like people. If our grandfathers were like people, we're like donkeys. So we don't come close to the level of our grandfathers, and therefore it makes sense to say that it's possible and likely that someone who succeeds the dynasty of a tzaddik before is not on the same level as his father. But the Rebbe himself encouraged the children of various Hasidic dynasties to continue their dynasty and lineage, even though they may have so thought of themselves not so befitting. So on this subject, there was a great Chassid. His name was Rabbi Gershon Per Pahar. And Rabbi Gershon Per was asked once about a certain Hasidic Rebbe who was clearly not in the realm of righteousness as his father. And people were wondering, how should they look at this scenario? What should they think about this man who, it seemed, he was a charlatan in comparison to his father? Rabbi Gershon Per said something very remarkable. He said, listen, when this man is asked for advice, for a blessing, and he knows he's not like his father, he knows he's not the same guy, and yet he has to give this blessing, you know what happens to him, said Rabbi Gershon Per? It breaks his heart. And the fact that his heart is broken, his broken heartness itself, that itself gives great merit to his blessings. So Rabbi Gershon Per was talking about other Hasidic dynasties, and he was saying that there is something about. He was explaining this power of someone who is not able to fill the shoes of his father, and yet he has to nonetheless continue the Hasidic dynasty on the level that he can. So, while that's true, Rabbi Gershon Per very uniquely was a man of truth, a man of absolute truth. And so, when someone once consulted with him about studying Chabad Hasidus, and this man was someone who had been a Chassid of one of the Chernobyl Rebbes, I don't know which one it was, but he was a Chassid of another dynasty. He asked Rabbi Gershon Per, should he study Chabad Hasidus? It seemed like that his Rebbe discouraged the study of Chabad Hasidus. So Gershon Per said something very remarkable about. He answered this very, very, very deeply. L'chaim. Gershon Per said this. He said that it says in the Talmud a story about the successor of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel in the Talmud had some sort of a disagreement with Rabbi Yeshua, and there was several events that brought into question Rabbi Gamliel's ability to maintain the leadership of his position. And so was decided, the Talmud says, was that someone had to succeed Rabbi Gamliel, and the one who was chosen was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took over Rabbi Gamliel, the Talmud says that something happened in the study hall. Rabbi Gamliel had a rule that anyone who wasn't Teiche Kabari, anyone who was not sincere, was not allowed into the study hall. And when Rabbi Gamliel was deposed of his position and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took over, he took away that role. He took away the guardian at the door, and hundreds of new students joined the study hall. When this rabbi found out about this, he was very distraught, and he was thinking, I caused so many people to stop studying Torah. I had this rule, I made this rule that people have to be sincere. If their inside is not like their outside, if they're just pretending to be devout and they're not really devout, they can't come to the study hall. This rule was probably not such a good rule, because look how many hundreds of students are now part of the study hall. That's what he felt. And the Talmud said that he had a dream, and in his dream, he saw these, I think, white jugs full of ashes, highlighting that although it seemed like he wasn't doing the right thing, it seemed like he all these students now joined the study hall, but the white jugs filled with ashes gave the message that the students that joined the study hall weren't that great. That was the purpose of his dream. But then the Talmud continues and says, "Velohi." The Talmud says this dream wasn't actually true. Meaning, the students that joined the study hall was a good thing. The fact there were hundreds of more students, although they weren't so sincere, was a good thing. And the reason he was shown in his dream a different vision was only in order to assuage his pain for feeling that he had held back the Torah from so many people. Now the question is, said Rabbi Gershon Ber, why is it that Hashem gave him this dream that made him maintain his position? If his position was incorrect, wouldn't it have been better for the dream to show him that you made a mistake and now you need to have a different path in serving Hashem? So the reason why he had this dream was because Hashem wanted him to maintain his position. Because there are different people. There are different times, and there are different scenarios. And although it was correct that for a group of students, it was considered heinous for them to not be so sincere, and they needed to be told, you're not allowed to go into the study hall until you're sincere, because they were capable of reaching a higher level. Other students weren't on that level, and they needed the door to be opened. So had Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah been the only leader of the Jewish people, then many students who were capable of reaching a higher level of sincerity would have never reached that level. But had Rabbi Gamliel been the only teacher of the Jewish people, had he can maintain in his position, then students who were incapable of reaching the level of sincerity that Rabbi Gamliel demanded, they would never have ever been able to allow to study Torah. And therefore, there was a need to have these two teachers, Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and everyone has to have has to serve Hashem in their level. So Rabbi Gershon Ber was saying that although this tzaddik had this opinion, and there was room for that opinion, however, there is also room for you to continue to study and to reach a higher level in your service of Hashem, and to delve deeper in a way of chochmin v'das, delve intellectually into the teachings of the Torah. So let me say it this way: the Mittler Rebbe was once asked by a certain chassid, maybe our service of Hashem, although we're calling it service of Hashem, maybe it's not really the service of Hashem. Maybe we're just pretending to serve Hashem. Maybe our service of Hashem is not at all the what we're doing. Mittler Rebbe responded, if it was all imaginary, you would not see my face. There's something about the reality of a tzaddik, and or a true tzaddik, a real tzaddik, that, as it says in Tanya, chapter 5, and Shayicha V'Emunah, that his very presence reveals godliness in this world. And seeing the tzaddik is a revelation of godliness in this world. And this is something that that we saw openly by the Rebbe, that people who would stand by the Rebbe and watch the Rebbe speak for hours and hours. Although they didn't know what the Rebbe was saying, they wouldn't get tired. They wouldn't get tired because there's a certain kind of a satisfaction that the soul experiences by looking at the face of a tzaddik, by the divine presence that is in the face of a tzaddik. So the Mittler Rebbe said, if it all wasn't real, you wouldn't see my face. This is why Hasidim have a tradition that when you see a Rebbe in your dream, you should make a celebration. Why should you make a celebration? Because seeing the Rebbe in your dream is a revelation of godliness. Maybe it wasn't real, it's a dream after all, and the Talmud says that dreams aren't meant to be taken so seriously. And yet, although it's not meant to take, there are things in a dream which aren't true. It's all that's correct. But nevertheless, you saw the Rebbe in your dream. There's something true to that. There's some revelation of Hashem in that experience. But obviously, the kind of connection that we have to the tzaddik, the more sincere we are, the more that connection is authentic. I want to share with you one more story. L'chaim. There was a time period when the Alter Rebbe, in the beginning of his leadership of Chabad, where he would share discourses in public on Shabbos, on holidays, before Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur, on Shabbos that before a new month, and the Alter Rebbe would share these discourses in public, and in private he would also share higher, more sophisticated, more deeper discourses to people who were part of his students of his chadarim, of his high level advanced academy. Later on in his leadership, he shared discourses with his son, only his son and his study partner Baron Stascheller, and only a very few unique individuals were allowed to be present by these lectures that the Alter Rebbe gave. They were very deep and holy discourses, and only select few people were allowed to come. This was given on Friday night. His grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, asked his grandfather if he could come, if he could speak, if he could see his grandfather say the discourse. And his grandfather didn't let him come. But the Alter Rebbe lived in a building which had two homes. And one home was used for the Alter Rebbe's family, and the other home was used for the Alter Rebbe himself. And in that home, there were two rooms. And in one room, there was a very large oven that was used to heat the whole entire building. And the other room was the room of the Alter Rebbe. And his 9-year-old grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, had this idea. I'm not allowed to come into the discourse, but there's a way for me to get into the discourse. What could I do? The oven that was on the other side of the wall extended into the room of the Alter Rebbe. So there was a wall between the oven and the Alter Rebbe's room. So if you would go into the oven, he'll be able to hear the discourse of the Alter Rebbe. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek did. Friday night, for a few weeks, he went into the oven. He was able to hear his grandfather speaking. But one week, it was Friday night, it was very cold, and they had to ask the Gentile attendant to stoke the oven because it was freezing. The problem was, when he came to put the wood in the oven, it wouldn't fit. So he lit the wood at the end of the oven. And all of a sudden, there's smoke, and the wood is being pushed out of the oven, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And then he reached in, and he said, "There's a little boy stuck in the oven," and the whole house is full of smoke. It was a terrible situation. And this story was shared by the Mittler Rebbe's Rebbetzin, the Mittler Rebbe's wife, Rebbetzin Shena, to Rebbetzin Rivka, the Rebbe Marasha's wife. She said that when they discovered that this young boy had in the oven, he was totally bewildered, he was totally traumatized. And she went to her mother-in-law, the Alter Rebbe's wife, Rebbe Sterna. She said to the Alter Rebbe, "You let in other people to hear the discourse, and your own child you don't let in." And the Alter Rebbe responded that it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, about Moses, that Moses went into Mount Sinai with a fire, with a flame, and so too the way to acquire Torah is with sacrifice. In other words, in merit, that Tzemach Tzedek sacrificing himself to be able to hear the words of the Alter Rebbe, that's how he'll hear the word. That's how he'll be able to acquire Torah. And the Alter Rebbe blessed him with long life. And the previous Rebbe said that whenever the Alter Rebbe blessed someone with long life, that meant they would live between the age of 90 and 100. However, Tzemach Tzedek passed away younger than that because it's a story in itself, how that Tzemach Tzedek sent a letter of request for blessing, and that letter was never delivered. That's why Tzemach Tzedek passed away 13 years earlier. But that's what the Alter Rebbe said. In order to be able to acquire the Torah, just like Moses went to Mount Sinai, and it says Mount Sinai was a flame, so too, in order to acquire the Torah, it requires sacrifice. So there is this teaching of the Tzemach Tzedek, how those who are close to the Tzaddik, chai, they're alive. But being close to the Tzaddik doesn't just mean that we do lip service and we act patriotic to the Tzaddik. It means that there's actually there's real devotion to the Tzaddik and his teachings, and to the point of giving of ourselves, to be able to learn and absorb and to share the teachings of the Tzaddik. So while it's true that every Jew can give a blessing, and certainly someone who comes from a lineage of great tzaddikim has the ability to give a blessing as well, and even if he doesn't have that power himself, but the fact that as Rav Gershon Ber said, the fact that he's brokenhearted, that itself means he has the power of a blessing. But there's something unique about someone who is actually a bona fide, a real, true tzaddik, who is a real Rebbe, who is transmitting to us the words of Hashem, as it says about the first Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, that I stand between you and Hashem to give you the word of Hashem. So that the dedication we have, like Moshe Rabbeinu, to receive the Torah, came through fire, came through sacrifice. That's how we're able to really connect to the tzaddik, and may Hashem Bat Pasol, that we should have a real deep connection to our Rebbe, and speedily see him, the Karav Mamish, the coming Mashiach, and we see this happen immediately. A good tavach and a freilich tavach. I think there's another point that is very relevant to this conversation. After the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, Mezritcher Maggid, passed away, his students, the Chavraya Kadisha, the Holy Brotherhood, had a discussion about how they were going to continue the efforts of the Mezritcher Maggid to spread the teachings of Chassidus. At this meeting, they apportioned various spheres of influence to various tzaddikim. Among them were the areas of White Russia, which was assigned to the Alter Rebbe, and Rav Shimon of Karlin, who had a very different path to the Alter Rebbe, eventually wanted to move to a city in the region of the Alter Rebbe called Meshekovitz. And the Alter Rebbe had three conditions in order to allow this move. Rabbi Shlomo Kalin asked Alter Rebbe's consent, and Alter Rebbe said, "My consent is contingent on three conditions. The first is that Rabbi Shlomo Kalin should not speak disparagingly about people who dedicate themselves to Torah study, although they are not into the teachings of Chassidus. He should not speak disparagingly about people who are endowed with a natural fear of heaven from birth, without their own efforts, but they have a natural fear of Hashem. And the third condition is, Rabbi Shlomo Karlin was very fond of quoting two phrases of the Torah. One is, do not rely on your understanding, and the other is that a tzaddik lives with his faith. The simple meaning of this is that your faith animates you. But Hashem of Karlin read this verse to mean, do not read the verse to mean that the tzaddik lives by his faith, but the tzaddik animates others by his faith. And Hashem of Karlin felt by his students having faith in him, they will be animated by his own faith in Hashem, and their connection to him was sufficient. They don't need to work on their own. Just need to have a connection to him, and he will animate them. He will give them life with his own faith in Hashem. It's tzaddik enlivens, animates with his faith. So the Alter Rebbe, of course, that teaching is a true teaching. However, the Alter Rebbe said that he also needs to encourage his students not to rely on him and to work on their own. And this, Reb Shimon Kalin could not agree to, because this was a fundamental difference between him and the teachings of a Chabad Chassidus. There was a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe whose name was Reb David. And Reb David was a little bit put off by the fact that he saw other colleagues of his who were Chassidim of other Rebbes, and it seemed like that they were receiving a lot more inspiration than he was. One of them was a friend of his who was a Chassid of Reb Chaim Chaikel Amdura. And he asked the Alter Rebbe about this. He said, what is this with this Chassid Reb Chaim Chaikel? So the Alter Rebbe said like this: when Chaim Chaikel davens, I don't want to misquote, but this was the content, I don't know the exact words. So there's a fire, and you're animated by that fire, and you're on fire too. But after he finishes praying, he remains Chaim Chaikel, but you, the Alter Rebbe said, remain David. You don't have that, it doesn't stay with you. And that's the reason why Chabad Chassidus emphasizes the idea of working on your own and not merely relying on the effort of a tzaddik. This is in sync with this theme that I'm trying to present tonight about how there are many paths, but there is a significant effort needed to try to serve Hashem on your own versus relying on the service of Hashem of the tzaddik.